through interesting day on the lawn stories, which we won't go into because what she's going to talk about is her work with Vietnam veterans and her recent trip to Vietnam for 3 weeks in December, I believe it was. And we took up too much of her time trying to get this stuff working, and it's now working, so I'm going to turn things over to Nancy.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm so excited to be here today, and I'm anxious to tell you why I wanted to go to Vietnam for much of my adult life, and I'll tell you a little bit about what happened. And I just want you to know that this was a trip of a lifetime and fulfilled several ministry goals for me. I had a great privilege of traveling to Vietnam the day before Thanksgiving. I was in Vietnam by myself for the first week as I did ministry and mission, and I'll tell you more about that. And then I hooked up with a group called the Veterans Breakfast Club. Do any of you know the Veterans Breakfast Club in Pittsburgh? It's an amazing group that has existed for 15 years. The founder is Dr. Todd DiBestino, who has a degree from Yale in history. He taught history courses at a couple of local colleges. One of them was the history of Vietnam and the history of the Vietnam War. And he was very interested in hearing veteran stories. And as he became more involved in hearing those stories, he realized that they were very valuable and should be preserved. So he founded the Veterans Breakfast Club and now works with thousands of veterans in our region with a lot of breakfasts at churches and a lot of activities to share and record and preserve their stories. You might want to Google them if you care about that kind of thing, and it's very successful in Pittsburgh. So I was happy to join with them. So there are 4 major reasons why I wanted to go to Vietnam since I was in high school. And the first is the Vietnam War, which happened and began in 1964. And I prayed often for the war and organized a group in my church and in my community to pray for our military and to pray for the civilians of Vietnam, that they would be safe, and just to pray for our country's attitude towards the war. And the war ended after 9 long years, as you well remember, and as many of you lived. So 58,000 American military men and women died in that war, and many, countless hundreds of thousands of others had some difficulty with, if they weren't physically maimed and injured, many of them had PTSD and any other illnesses that have carried with them for the 50 years since the war ended at the fall of Saigon. So I care about those issues, I care about those men, and I do consulting and fundraising and PR and marketing, but you can hold on to your wallets today. But I have worked for a number of years with homeless veterans. And I do my work at Shepherd's Heart Fellowship, and there's a little flyer here if you want to learn more about them. But they virtually are 1 block. It's an Anglican church, 1 block from UPMC Mercy Hospital. And their veterans can live on the 2nd floor of the church for 6 to 8 months, and they receive comprehensive counseling and casework and other rehabilitation services, and working very closely with the Veterans Administration to help to address their issues. I care about their stories, I care about them, I care about their well-being. So I wanted to know more about Vietnam and its life and its recovery since the war. And I also had this privilege 15 years ago to become a friend of Da Nang. Da Nang is the 3rd largest city. We all know Hanoi, we all know Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, which it's now called. But we may not have all heard of Da Nang. But in Vietnam, it's known as the City of Bridges. And so it's a sister city to Pittsburgh, officially. And about 20 years ago, before that sisterhood began, a number of U.S. Air Force veterans who served at the Air Force Base in Da Nang decided that they wanted to give back, they wanted to reach back, they wanted to help restore the schools and the hospitals in Da Nang. And so they began raising money 20 years ago, and I joined them 15 years ago. So I'm a friend of Da Nang, and I wanted to go personally and see some of those schools and hospitals so I could report to other donors. So that's another reason that I wanted to go. And my third reason was that I care very much about the unexploded ordinances that are present in Vietnam. In the early 70s, I spoke out strongly against that issue as a Christian and wanted there to be more work done to find some of those unexploded ordinances and to deactivate them. Since the war, 8,000 people have been named or died because they discovered one of those ordinances. And this is a statistic that really shocked me, but during the 9 years of the war, our Air Force dropped 7.5 million tons of bombs in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. And many of those were 500-pound, 250-pound bombs, and many of them never exploded. And they're sitting somewhere in the rice paddies or the ocean or on farms or in remote areas. And so it's very important to educate the people today. Using our technology today, it's going to take hundreds of years to remove all those from the countries of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And I'd like to report to you some of that work that's being done. Princess Diana was the spokesperson in 1970 for that issue. She got international acclaim that I got God's attention, I believe, with my prayer activity and my church activities on that issue. And it's unfortunately still a major issue today. And that was my third reason for wanting to go to Vietnam. I'm telling you, I really prayed and had care for that country that literally is half a globe away. It's as far as you can go away from America before you start coming back to America. It's a 12-hour time distance. So it was great in communicating with family because if it was 9 a.m. where I was, it was 9 p.m. where they were on the same day. And so I didn't have to keep looking at my watch and try to calculate that time difference, but it's far away. And it's still, though, a country that has a lot of good things that are important to America that are happening in Vietnam. So my fourth reason for wanting to go to Vietnam was that I know a young missionary there, and I'll tell you more about him. But let me just orient you to the map. So the orange part, all of this is just Vietnam, nothing else, just Vietnam, but it shows its various regions. The north part, and you can see that Hanoi up there, very large, that's the capital of the country. It's definitely in the north, and it was the head of the north activities during the war when there was a north and a south Vietnam. China sits above Vietnam, and it also sits to the east of Vietnam. And China has some islands and some topography that reaches down and creates the Gulf of Tonkin up there around Hanoi, and that's where the war began. So there's also a lot of coastal lowlands in the green, and near the bottom of the green is Hue, H-U-E, a spiritual center for Vietnam, and it also was where much of the fighting took place. It's the demilitarized zone is just above Hue. So a lot of our Americans spent their time, their camps, their battles in Hue, and I'll tell you more about those. And then the blue begins Da coastal city, and on the east, all of this is open ocean, and it's actually the South China Sea. And that's causing a great deal of discord right now with China, who lays claim to the South China Sea. So we can see a lot of lovely beaches. It's 1,000 feet, 1,000 miles long from the top to the bottom, and yet in some areas you can see it's not much more than 30 miles wide. Particularly up there in the demilitarized zone and in some of the other coastal areas. The highlands are here in the red, and at the bottom of the yellow, the horizontal line tells you that's Ho Chi Minh City. And Ho Chi Minh City is what you and I know as Saigon. So that also was an important city in the war, and the fall of Saigon 50 years ago indicated the end of the war. The green is the Mekong Delta. Good morning, Vietnam. I watched that movie a couple times in my life, including on the plane. As I flew to Vietnam, I got my last taste of those gunships that were patrolling the Mekong Delta, and of that great story of Good Morning, Vietnam. Just to give you also a further perspective, so it's surrounded with China, and that's causing a great deal of discord over the South China Sea and many other issues right now. The country of Laos is pretty parallel with where the green and some of the blue is, and Cambodia is in this area, and then to the west of them is Thailand. So during the war, there was a lot of activity both in Vietnam, and not necessarily legal activity, but it happened. And there were a lot of movement by the North Vietnamese of supplies and men through Laos and Cambodia, through the Ho Chi Minh Trail, so that they could have better access to the primary cities and military installations that they wanted to attack. But that does give you a perspective of how important that area is and how close is the proximity between Vietnam and China. And you will know that 2 months before I went to Vietnam, President Biden paved the way for me by showing up in Vietnam, and he reaffirmed all the trade agreements that we have with Vietnam. They're right now in some battles with China, particularly related to the South China Sea, but also related to other trade issues. And there's always a fear that China ultimately would like to take over Vietnam. And so they are resisting that with great effort. And therefore they've got some passport disputes, and there are no Chinese visitors that are permitted into Vietnam because the passports are not being accepted by Vietnam, because they show a map in all their passports indicating that they control the South China Sea. So that offends Taiwan, and it offends Vietnam, and it offends America. So I am excited with the reaffirmation and the restoration of the situation with Vietnam. And I'd like to tell you more about that, but I hope that gives you some perspective. So my absolute fourth reason for wanting to go to Vietnam, and there are many, is this man, David Kuehl, K-U-E-H-L. And David was the child of missionary parents and spent his life growing up in small towns in France where his father was a Presbyterian pastor. He also, when he married Melissa, as seen in this photo, he and Melissa went to South Korea to be missionaries early in their lives. And then their 3 young boys came, and they decided they should come back to America for a period to be with the grandparents and other extended family members. So they settled in Pittsburgh, of all places, and David was hired at La Roche College working through Memorial Park Presbyterian Church. And and they were able to work with international students at La Roche. And that's where I met David. He spent 6 years there, and he and I did a lot of ministry together with international students. And I loved him, and I prayed with him as he and Melissa expressed a feeling that God wanted them to return to the Far East. So David and I prayed for years, and God revealed a plan 4 years ago for David to return and to teach English at 2 universities in Vietnam, and they were in the city of Da Nang. So, and thus then was the reason that I needed to have a missionary trip, a missions trip to Da Nang, and to help to celebrate David's ministry and to meet with some of his students. And his family is a great joy. I communicate with them regularly and have for the last 4 years. I pray with them, I see their pictures, I hear their stories, and I'm so grateful that I got to join them. David, on a rainy Saturday while I was there, had invited many of his students to come meet me. And David tells his students that he's a follower of Jesus, but he's not permitted, obviously, in class. It's a communist country. He's not permitted to talk about God unless he's answering a question. But he does make it very clear to his students that he loves Jesus. So he promoted me as his mentor and a follower of Jesus. And half of his students came. There were 30 students who showed up on a rainy Saturday. They came at 9. I gave them permission to ask me any question about the United States or about myself, and they did. And it was just a wonderful experience. And so to a person at the end of the day, they came up to me, and almost always we cried together and we hugged each other. Because again, these are students from Da Nang. They grew up near Da Nang in most instances, so they were South Vietnamese. And their own grandparents fought in the war as allies and as co-workers with Americans. And they just wanted me to know how much they appreciated that we had come to fight for their country. And it was a great feeling of gratitude and never really understanding why we would do that, but they were grateful that we did. So the kind of questions they asked me is, the American dream still alive? And I talked to them about that, and then I asked them about the Vietnamese dream. It's a little different from ours in that they desire very much to have a good education, and it is free through high school, and then they need to be tested, and there is an opportunity for higher ed. The average family income in Vietnam is about $10,000 to $12,000 per individual who works in the family, and more often than not, it's the one primary person who is the breadwinner, but others can always be entrepreneurial and find other jobs on the side. But a college education, if they stay in Vietnam, at the universities where David teaches, starts at $12,000 a year. So, you know, that's a family's whole annual income in many instances. So it's quite a sacrifice for them to be educated. They also talked to me about my ideas of some entertainment leaders. They all wanted to know what I thought of Taylor Swift. And I heard what they thought of Taylor Swift, and they had all seen most of them had already seen the Eras tour that's in a movie now. And I had the opportunity to say to them, I have a granddaughter who lives in Mississippi, and she's enamored by a boy band. Are you enamored by boy bands, and if so, whom? And the second guess that they had for my granddaughter's band was BTS, which is a Korean pop group. And if you have any younger individuals, or maybe even yourself, you like BTS, they certainly have a lot of enthusiasm, and that immediately connected it. Music is a connector throughout the world. But so was war, and we had connections because of the Vietnam War, and I was grateful to meet them. Their Vietnamese dream, by the way, in addition to the education, is to buy a water buffalo. Rice is their principal export, and even if they have another job as a shopkeeper or in retail or administration or in guest services in a hotel, for example, they still have time to have their own small rice paddy and to raise some additional money for their family. And a water buffalo helps that to happen. I don't know anyone in America who's hoping for that as part of their dream. But after the education, after the water buffalo, they hope that they will be married or that they will have a meaningful job that allows them to give back to the country that they love. And so in many ways, again, we're all connected. We all have dreams, and that we should reach for those dreams. They stayed from 9 o'clock till 1:30, and it was raining, and we wanted to send them home, and we wanted them to be fulfilled. So David and I decided at this cafe that we needed to buy them all soup before we sent them out, because they were all on motorbikes. And when I asked them about their families, 1/3 of their families were farmers, and many other were in retail or in restaurant services or other kind of guest services. We stayed in a hotel in Hoi An, and my hotel was built in 2019. It was a small boutique hotel right on the ocean, and it was amazing. And my friend David lives on the same street. So everybody at the hotel watched over me. I was there in Vietnam for that week alone during ministry, but everybody at the hotel knew who I was, and they watched, and they encouraged, and they chatted. And sometimes I just wanted peace and quiet, and everybody at the hotel, because they promised David they would, they were kind to me. And so I was filled with kindness, but also filled with some opportunities for a lot of devotional time, a lot of recovery time from the flight, and a lot of prayer time, and then time to go look at the schools and hospitals in Da Nang, which was just so fulfilling and wonderful to me. I was alone, but I never felt alone. In Hoi An, it's only 7 miles from Da Nang, and so I flew into Da Nang. And Hoi An is a World Heritage Center, and it was a major trade center in Southeast Asia from the 15th to the 19th centuries. So a lot of their buildings in Old Town have been preserved and reused, and this is just part of the nightlife of Old Town. I really love all the Asian lanterns that you see everywhere in Hoi An and Da Nang, plentifully so. And I try not to call them Japanese lanterns as I used to when I was a child. They're Asian lanterns, and they're everywhere. But I think this gives you a feel for what it was like to be in Hoi An and see some of their beautiful buildings. The next day was Sunday, and David attends a non-denominational church in Da Nang, again 7 miles away. David and his wife both have motorbikes, and they're able to manage to take the 3 boys with them on their 2 motorbikes. And motorbike is the principal activity for transportation in Da Nang and throughout Vietnam. But we took a taxi that day because I was alone, and they didn't want me to be on the motorbike. They honored their elder. So they worship in a church. It is legal that there be a church in Da Nang and throughout Vietnam, as long as it's under the cover of a Protestant Vietnamese-based church. So this church had Vietnamese services at 9 o'clock. We arrived also at 9 because we wanted to be in prayer and fellowship with many of the church members who were part of the non-denominational church, which David is one of the leaders of. So a beautiful church, and I captured this photo of a sign where they shared their mission statements. And as followers of Jesus, I thought you would enjoy reading through these mission statements with me and see if any resonate with you. So we will not read the Vietnamese, so that's a good thing. But beginning with number 1, let's read together their mission statements. More lively in worship. Number 2, more depth in God's word. That's great. Number 3, more united in love. Number 4, more enthusiastic in serving. And number 5, more focus on evangelish. So they didn't get the spelling quite right, but the evangel is the important part, and they understand the importance of sharing the gospel with their neighbors. So I was very happy to see number 5, and I do comment upon spelling. Former English teacher, I held my tongue. So it was just great to be in this church and to celebrate God's word and really lively worship. And there were a lot of expats who worship in this church. So I was excited to meet many people from America of varying ages. There were doctors and nurses who are working in various hospitals in Da Nang. There were some former military men and women who have a passion for the poor. And so they were helping to provide in Da Nang some very basic shelter and food issues. And also, they were working with the mountain people. There are 43 different people groups in Vietnam, and many of the people in the mountains, are not widely connected with the mainstream of Vietnam, and their lifestyle is just different, and they lack a lot of basic resources. And it's just wonderful to see, particularly some American military people who were sensitive to that and who returned to provide that service. There were a number of other expats who were in the restaurant business. Some of them may have had family or themselves have been veterans and been in Vietnam, and many others who had retail shops. So I met some wonderful people at church, which is a good place to meet and to share and to have fellowship and to encourage one another. So after this wonderful time in Vietnam, I really felt that my mission trip in Da Nang was successful. I saw people, I visited wonderful schools and hospitals, I visited with college students, and I gave some support and advice to David and Melissa, and I loved being with their children. And that is mission. So my next day was in the heart of Hanoi. So my primary mission trip, having ended with 6 days, I went to Hanoi on a Tuesday afternoon, and by Wednesday morning in rush hour traffic, I was in the midst of hundreds and hundreds of motorbikes in rush hour traffic. And if you were a tour guide in Vietnam, in a large city, you would probably say, I want to immerse the people in my group in understanding the traffic patterns and the traffic issues. And I want them to see all the lively activity that occurs early in the morning with the sale of food and other things. And I just want them to really have a harrowing, amazing, wonderful experience. So I will take them to a rickshaw rental place, and I will let them all be alone in their rickshaw without a whole lot of defenses, and I will just see what they have to say about it. And so it happened, and so it was wonderful, and it was harrowing, and but I find that drivers that I observed and that others tell me about in Vietnam, because of the plentifulness of the motorbikes, they are kind to one another, they are watchful, they are not looking at their phones, and I got great advice for crossing a street because there aren't a whole lot of traffic lights, And the advice is just start walking and be observant and don't walk fast because that's unpredictable. Just walk at your normal pace and the motorbikes will just swirl all around you, but you'll be fine. And that works for someone like me who's mobile. But as you know, in many countries in Europe and particularly in Asia, it's very difficult for people who have disabilities. So fortunately, I was able to climb up into the rickshaw. Fortunately, I was not injured. And to the best of my knowledge, none of my group caused injury to anyone else. On that very same day, I'm still wearing the same outfit. I was in a restaurant and I loved the food at Vietnam. That's another discussion for another day, but I'd love to tell you about it or meet you at a Vietnamese restaurant, and there are several in Pittsburgh. But after we were in the restaurant, Jerry, who was a veteran of the Vietnam War, and I walked out together and we encountered this group of young women. They saw us, we saw them, and it was love at first sight. And we began talking and sharing and just saying where we were from and what we were doing and that kind of stuff. And I came later to understand how important it is in Vietnam that all people respect their elders and give honor and pay attention to older folks. And so Jerry and I qualified in their eyes, and they even asked if they could have their picture with us. And that gave us considerable honor. We're not sure what they were going to do with the picture, but it's okay because we communicated and we smiled and we shared, and it was a great experience. This is the group from Veterans Breakfast Club that I hooked up with for the second 2 weeks. There were 21 of us, and 15 were American military veterans, and 7 were veterans of the Vietnam War, and it was their first time back in country. Could I ask, is anybody in this room a veteran of Vietnam? Are there people here who had friends or family who fought in Vietnam? Certainly, all of us, and most of us. And it was just so wonderful for those 7 men and women for us to be able to go to the battle sites, to go to their camps where they lived, usually for a year, and to go to some of the places that they visited as younger people, and then also that we made plenty of time to listen to their stories and to learn from them and to encourage them. And in varying degrees, those 7 men and women have adjusted back to society. And 3 of them, actually, that was their first period of service for America as young officers during the period of the war. And they have all recently retired as colonels. One of them was a woman who was a nurse in the war, and she retired recently as a colonel. So it was just an honor to get to know them and to hear their stories and to celebrate God's goodness in protecting them and hearing about those that they had become close to in the war, who were lost in the war, and praying with them over a lot of issues in their lives. It was just a great coming together of people who have compassion, empathy, and caring. And we visited a number of memorials for the Vietnamese dead. We went to a lot of museums. We learned about the people of Vietnam, and we learned about ways that we can all be together in peace. We had a great opportunity to visit in the home of a Vietnamese family. And many of you know the story in the Far East that usually the oldest son knows from almost birth that his obligation in life is to care for his parents and as they advance in age, and that they usually all live in the same house. So in this house where we were invited to have a meal, there were 21 of us and 15 of the extended family who were there. So this young man lives with his father and mother and 2 sisters, and they were the oldest son and expected to care for their father's parents and for their great-grandparent who lived in the same house. And then in addition to that, they invited the brother's brother to live in the house with his 5 family members. And it's very important to them that they, in Vietnam, have a house that they call the ancestors' room. And again, it's their honoring of older folks. And so the ancestors' room had lots of photographs and lots of scrapbooks and memorabilia, so they could go there as individuals or as a family on a regular basis and pray for their ancestors and pray for their older family members who were in the household. One of the real difficulties that we had in Hanoi was going to the Hanoi Hilton, and the most famous prisoner in Hanoi Hilton, of course, was John McCain. And it was very difficult for us. They used mannequins to show how crowded the facilities were, how dark the facilities were, and how few resources there were. Over 660 prisoners were in the Hanoi Hilton throughout the war. There were about 300 or 400 other prisoners that were held elsewhere, but this was the primary place, particularly if they were officers or pilots. And we do believe there was abuse and that there was torturing going on there. John McCain was a very wonderful veteran who, when he became a senator, was the principal person encouraging our government to restore trade relationships with the United States. And he's remembered well in Vietnam. He forgave his captors, and he has a monument and other memories by the Vietnamese people. It was very hard for us as a team from America to read all the news clippings and to see all the news stories about the Hanoi Hilton. And again, those would have been put together and organized by people who fought on the opposing side. And we wept as we were throughout the Hanoi Hilton that morning, but it was an important thing for us to do. The next day, we were able to go to Hai Long Bay, which is a resort about an hour from Hanoi. And we saw these beautiful, over a 4-hour excursion, we saw all these beautiful rock formations that were just lovely. We had lunch on the boat, and then we went to some beautiful caves. And Hai Long is also a World Heritage Site. When we went to Hue, H-U-E, a lot of the major battles were in the Hue area. This was a Catholic church, and nothing was standing still but the bell tower. I particularly loved the statue that was on the grounds during the war and was not harmed. I collect nativities from all over the world, and I love this. I would guess that it was done by a sculptor who herself was from Vietnam. I see some Asian features in Mary and baby Jesus, and I was honored to celebrate and to see that on the site. Hue, you may remember the Tet Offensive in 1968, where simultaneously 85,000 North Vietnamese attacked 13 major cities, including Hue, and several military installations. And while we valiantly fought them off, it's widely believed that that was a turning point in the war in 1968 for the American public to begin questioning and no longer having support of the war. So Hue was very important, and we were able to go to the presidential palace and see all its grandeur and its beautiful gardens. We interrupted the wedding photographs of a wonderful couple and congratulated them. We were able to go in that area to a wonderful museum and an active site where they are concerned about the unexploded ordinances and all the other cluster bombs and grenades that are an issue. And I'm so grateful that there's a great educational program and there's a strong reaction led by America, Norway, Israel, Ireland, and Great Britain in helping to get rid of all of these. I loved this banner. The bomb that says war is hidden by the words peace and by the dove, and that was at that center. Peace trees. Our guide, as we traveled throughout Vietnam, he'd say, do you see all those trees on this side of the boulevard, and do you see all those trees for miles on this side of the boulevard? Those were not there 50 years ago. They were all planted in celebration of peace, and it really makes a difference for shelter. I love children's art therapy, and I have hundreds of pictures, but I chose this one because it reminds me during COVID of the healthcare professional was there, but also COVID had some very serious lock-ins. In fact, they would lock people in their homes so that they couldn't get out, so that they could help to control the COVID experience. And military would regularly visit with emergency supplies and food, and often with flowers. And this child, I believe, represented that. The presidential palace in Saigon, and on the grounds were still the tanks and the helicopters and other things that invaded the presidential palace was signaled the fall of Saigon in 1973. And now it's open to the people of the world to come and visit, but particularly it's the People's House of Vietnam for them to go there and to remember and to see the memorabilia. I love the people of Vietnam and the light that comes from the lanterns and the people who are making them. These are some of the older people that I saw. And I just want you to know that the reason that I went to Vietnam was to serve God, to carry the light, to do mission work. And God fulfilled that. It was everything I prayed and dreamed it would be. And I just really trust that wherever I go as a follower of Jesus. And I do what is good for God, to the glory of God.
Thank you so much, Nancy. We're going to probably need to head out because church is starting real soon. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be around this church. I just live across the street, and I am really enjoying the excitement that comes from this church and your understanding of ministry. It was mentioned earlier that I had a great experience with the lawn sales, where I came and bought some dining room furniture for an immigrant Turkish family, and you all were wonderful, even helped me carry the furniture home, and then Bonnie Moorhead even agreed that she would like to deliver the furniture for me to that family in Dorma. And we also bought a rug, and we bought some outdoor furniture, and I bought a lot of jewelry. I bought every pin that I could find that I thought a homeless woman would love to have. I bought 12 watches at very reasonable prices. I have people who put new batteries in them, and then we let homeless people choose which watch they want. And so your lawn day was a great day of ministry, and I just thank you for your kindness, for your welcoming, and for the work that you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Come back next week and hear Caroline Johns talk about her trip to Israel. This is just so exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.